Hey, aloha, teachers. Welcome back. We're starting a new book of scripture today. We're starting the book of Ether, going into this last little bit. We're also winding down the semester, so as you're thinking about credit and all of those things, just this is a good time to be paying attention to that. And before we get into the book of Ether, some of you probably already know this. Your coordinators might have already reached out, or supervisors might have already reached out, but we're starting a brand new curriculum in January. And there will be training forthcoming probably this month from each of us coming to you. And it's not just a new book of curriculum, right? We're starting Doctrine and Covenants, but there's new life help lessons that will incorporate it, and that's going to change our pacing and all that stuff. So be looking forward to that. But you can already go on to Gospel Library under handbooks and callings and seminary and look at that curriculum and start to familiarize yourself with that. Anything about that from anybody else here?
Most of my trainings will be the first part of December. So if
Yeah,
you're in
same,
Alaska, expect that.
same for me.
Yeah, and
Okay.
it's it the we spent a little bit of time here recently doing a deep dive. The resources for this new curriculum is pretty extensive and maybe a little bit spread out. So it'll be helpful for you to attend these trainings so you just know where stuff is as you kind of look forward to fulfilling your calling in 2025. So
And as a group here, even though we're spread across 4 different states, we're going to sync up pacing calendars as much as possible. I know there's going to be some differences in school districts and so forth, but that's going to allow us to incorporate that into this weekly training that we send out. And so it won't just be that you get one big training from us this month or next month, but we're going to be doing kind of ongoing stuff to help us work through this, because this is new to us too. And so even if you don't get it right away, we're with you throughout it. Okay. um teaching tips. Nikki, going in here, you had some teaching suggestions.
Yeah, I know that every week, even in the curriculum, they have some things that we can focus on as teachers so that we can just be better at teaching, but also help the youth with things. So this week, one of the ideas is we are going to be talking about the basic concept of prayer. And sometimes when we teach basic concepts, we assume that our students know what we're talking about. And we talk about prayer a lot, but on different levels, our youth are coming at prayer in their understanding. And sometimes they have some apprehensions towards some of these basic things that we talk about. So you run the risk of the students shutting down when you say, okay, we're going to talk about prayer today. Just so we can focus on those concepts, you might want to do something to see where they're at in their understanding of prayer when you're talking about communication with God this week with Ether and the brother Jared in Ether with the brother Jared and his communications with God. And then another thing to focus on this week could be to invite the students to seek the Lord's help with their personal problems as they study. Elder Oaks gives a good quote of this, and it is in the curriculum. He says, by reading the scriptures, we invite and qualify ourselves for the inspiration of the Holy Ghost, which will guide us to all truth. And so as we talk about in the book of Ether this week, there's a lot of that relationship with God. And so we can have them connect to the scriptures and connect with what problems they're going through currently and how they can receive answers to those problems in the scriptures. So those two things, be aware of how to teach those basic concepts that we talk about all the time that they might not quite understand.
Don't assume that they get them because they're basic, right?
Yep. And then invite them to seek the Lord's help with their personal problems this week
Awesome.
as they read the scriptures.
Awesome. Okay, so let's jump into Ether 1 through 5. Ether is a strange book. It is an abridgment, Moroni's abridgment of Mosiah's translation of 24 plates found by the people of Limhi, that were recorded by the prophet Ether, who is the last prophet of the Jaredites. And this people goes all the way back to the Tower of Babel. It's clearly an abridgment. It goes really quick. There's some places where it slows down, and there are some really incredible stories like what we'll be talking about this week. But then there's places where you jump many, many generations. And then throughout the book, there are 6 moments where Moroni really breaks into the foreground and speaks directly to us. And so it's not going to read exactly like some of the other books that that we've done. We're stepping into a new people with a new history and a new timeline. And so there's potential for our students to be confused about kind of where we're at and what we're talking about and who these people are. So as you start off with Ether 1, how are you framing this book? How are you working that into the first lesson of the curriculum here? What do you guys think?
So here's a question. I'm looking at the Ether 1 lesson, and you guys just tell me your personal preference on this. The way it flows in the curriculum is there's kind of an attention grabbing, a hook activity where you're talking about actions and consistency of actions that kind of gets them going, and then you kind of frame it in prayer. Then they take a big step back and they give context to the book of Ether. They give an interesting timeline, and then they get back to prayer in the context of the scripture. So I looked at that and I immediately thought, well, I don't know if that's the order I would use. And maybe this is just potato, but I think as a teacher, I would probably just start off giving a quick intro to the book and a timeline, because we just finished Mormon and the end of the Nephites. I think I would start with, okay, this book is, and give maybe show that timeline first, just for context. And then I'd get into, let's get into the hook so that we can start talking about this idea of Jared asking his brother to cry unto the Lord and the Lord having compassion on him. That was just kind of nuts and bolts for me. Is the first thing I observed was I'd probably flip those things. Do you guys have a preference? Is that all right? Or does that even not matter to you?
I think I agree with that idea that I would start definitely with context, because as Mason said, it's kind of a weird book. It's placed weird because it's the rest of the Book of Mormon is largely kind of in this chronographic order. And so it's almost like it's this really weird flashback, but then we're going to get some flash forward to Moroni, and then we're going to flash back again, but then there's going to be a flash forward way forward to Joseph Smith's time, where we talk about the 3 witnesses. And so it's a really complicated book that I would definitely start with context, how this book was came about, why is Moroni putting it here, and then once that context is in place, then I think I would just, they know the story of the Jaredites. It's one of the classics of Book of Mormon stories. And so I think I would let the text and the narrative of the text introduce the concept of prayer, because we can jump past, some of these generations and just look at, this is going to be a lot of time that we're going to cover in a very little time. But what do we know about Jared? What do we know about his brother? We can even answer the question, why is he only called the brother of Jared? What comes about, it's because of that genealogy. It's a genealogy of Jared and his descendants. And oh, by the way, Jared had this really great brother, but we're not going to be given his name, but he's got a really compelling story. So I would just let the narration of that first chapter introduce the concept of prayer, and then do what Nikki was saying. So, all right, well, so we got, how many different times do you see Ether using this phrase cry, or the brother of Jared used the phrase cry unto the Lord, cry unto the Lord? Why does he use that phrase and not just the word pray and ask Heavenly Father? Why is it cry unto the Lord? How does that change the way he's probably approaching the Lord? And how, and I just let the text do most of the heavy lifting. Send the students into the text, let them discover what they're to learn about prayer, and then kind of come back. And I like the idea of gauging their understanding beforehand, and then send them in. Well, however you want to do it, I would let the text do most of the work.
Nikki?
Yeah, everything that has been said is perfect. I don't know that I would add anything to it. I was thinking about, how do you get them to explain to you how they feel about prayer? And sometimes in questions like, when was the last time you received revelation? Or when was the last time you feel like you've had an answer to your prayer? Might get some discussion going, but answers to prayers come in lots of different ways. And there are usually a handful of students in my classes that are feeling like they've been praying but haven't received answers. So somehow I'd like to get to that point. Yeah, Ryan?
I was just going to say another really good question to ask is, when have you received an answer to your prayer that you knew was an answer, but to anybody else it might seem like it was just coincidence or not an answer, but you knew it was an answer?
Yeah, that would be a good one. See if you can get him talking about that. I really liked when Elder Holland gave the talk, Motions of a Hidden Fire. He said something that just changed the way that I prayed a little bit. He says, brothers and sisters, I testify that God hears every prayer we offer and responds to each of them according to the path he has outlined for our perfection. So I think doing something along those lines with that quote, the idea that when prayers are answers, it's answered, or what it feels like they're not answered, it's part of the path that he has outlined for your perfection. Yeah.
Very good.
Or
Love
how are
that.
your prayers similar or different from how the brother of Jared prayed? Maybe you can get some leadway there. That's all.
Very good. I think one tip or one option, if you wanted to kind of choose Ricky's way of going about it, of doing context first and then jumping into it. Context can seem boring to our students, even though it's so vital. One thing I might do is I might have them almost like as a review, what is the pride cycle, right? And sketch it out, right? And think about, because here Moroni he's the last of his people, and he's thinking back on what happened to his people. So you might just say, okay, based on what we've read about the Nephites, what brought them to destruction? These were the Lord's people. The Lord had led them to a promised land. How did they get from being led to the promised land with prophets to being destroyed? And see what they come up with. Because for me, it's really clear that as Moroni's looking back on this, other people that the Lord has led, that he sees the same pattern, or he wants us to see that same pattern. And then, what I would say is Elder Bednar has recently been very clear that these books are both written for us, right? And so it's this warning for us as we read the book of Ether. We're looking for that pattern, not so that we can learn about the Jaredites. That's not the point here. And not so that we can learn about the Nephites, but it's so that we can view our own state of, here we are, the church in the last days. We have living prophets. What are the options available to us?
Yeah.
So I might go at it that way.
It's a second witness to what we just read, right? Of the pride cycle, and the righteous will prosper, the wicked will be destroyed. I mean, you even have in chapter 1, verse 43, a Abrahamic covenant statement where he says, there will I bless thee and thy seed, and raise up unto me of thy seed and of the seed of thy brother, and they who shall go with thee, a great nation. I mean, it's Abrahamic prior to Abraham, but it's God's covenant. It's the covenant he's establishing with this people. So it's almost like this is a microcosm of the Book of Mormon to serve as a second witness to what we just spent all year studying. We're going to see again in just a matter of a couple of weeks.
It's like when you're watching a show and you're near the end of the series finale, and there's always, right before the end, there's always a recap episode that takes you through the story, right? It's like, that's kind of what we're doing here, is that recap episode. Okay, so with that, prayer gets introduced as a really central piece of the story in chapter 1 in our first lesson, and it's going to take an even more prominent role in chapters 2 and 3. I don't know if I would teach chapter 2 and chapter 3 as distinct chapters. Like they have them chapter 2 one day and chapter 3 the next day. To me, I might do a little bit about the kind of traveling through the wilderness, being led by the Lord. Maybe that's how I would break it up if I needed it to be two different days. But I would try and create that arc from let's see, from verse 13 essentially of chapter 2 all the way to the end of chapter 3. That's one story arc of the brother of Jared forgetting to pray, right, and getting lazy on the shore because he's catching too many waves and drinking tropical drinks with little straw hats on them, right? And then this process of prayer, it's a different type of prayer where it's a dialogue with the Lord. And then I would bring that dialogue all the way through to chapter 3 and his experience with Jesus Christ. How would you guys do this?
I mean, there's an element here that almost makes me think, with chapter 1, the central concept of crying unto the Lord and him having compassion, almost lends to getting to verses 13 through 15, where it's almost like how did he go from this moment where he had to be told to go ask about this thing and God to 13 through 15 where he does have a full-on conversation. Like, I almost could fit there. I agree with you that you could start here and then you got to follow through, but there's so much. This is so dense from 13, chapter 2, 13, all the way to the end of 3. There's no way you're going to try to do it in one day. You could probably tell the story and then pick out themes across days, but I almost don't know if there's a problem necessarily where you sit and you focus on the 3 problems and the 3 answers that he gets, and talking about the principles that come from the Lord, sometimes giving answers straight to you. Sometimes he's asking you to kind of work through some of the issues yourself and be an agent who acts. And then like I'd almost overlap those, because you got to finish that with the brother of Jared seeing the finger of God and then actually being introduced into his presence. But then I'd also want to go back to that experience, because that's not all about prayer. There's actually an endowment experience here. This is a temple experience. I'd almost want that to be a separate day in itself. So it's almost like, I think you're right, Mason. I think across 2 days, you're probably going to be touching on both of those chapters. Don't split them up, because you're going to want to kind of see that overlap across 2 things.
Yeah, and I would say that there's a couple of themes that are linked to prayer. So if you're talking about prayer and then finding out how they feel about that, then
bring
you
it
need both
across a couple chapters. Yeah, I like that.
Bring both chapter 2 and chapter 3 under a couple of themes. One theme being, as it's listed in the curriculum, directed continually by the hand of the Lord. You can find that in both 2 and 3.
Right.
Directed continually by the hand of the Lord. And if I'm talking about prayer, how do I receive answers to my prayers? I'm being directed by the Lord as to things. I'm not asking things beyond what the Lord has made a plan for me. And then in chapter 3, the theme is such exceeding faith. And so that's also in both chapters 2 and 3. How do we work through our problems and trust God in the problems and then show faith throughout the problems? I do like in chapter 2, the idea of discussing like who do you go to when you have a problem, and what gets you to the point of trusting that person with those problems. We've done it a couple of times, even with a couple of you, where they write their challenge, and then we pass those challenges to another class outside of their seminary. So a local seminary nearby or a seminary in Alaska, you could go from a different city and just email the challenges, and then have the students take each of the challenges that were written by other students and find in scriptures ways for students to help them feel like they can overcome this problem with faith in Jesus Christ. And then you get your answers back. And it was really great. A couple of times that I did it, it's really great because you start to realize, oh, wait, other people have the same challenges I do. And then also, oh, wait, there's lots of answers of faith in the scriptures of how to overcome these problems. So that second, if you were going to do it in, I wouldn't just focus on chapter 2 alone, but if we were going to talk about how do we trust our problems to the Lord and then be directed by him on how to overcome them, I would maybe do a challenge thing like that.
Ryan, any input?
So chapter 2 and 3, these are some of my favorite chapters to teach. And the question, the hook that I would start with is I'd have it written on the board, and I would just write true or false. God will never give me something that I can't handle.
Yeah.
And I will intentionally leave it vague like that, and kind of start this conversation about challenges that we have in our life, but especially God will never, because as you know, as we've talked before, that's a false statement, right? We know that God often puts us in some challenging situations, but this is a perfect example. So I would start there, and then what I would ask them to do, because I know that my students like to draw, they like to doodle. I give them each a piece of paper, and I would have read verse 16 and 17, and I would ask to do their best interpretation, drawing out the descriptions of these barges. I want you to draw it as best as you can. A lot of it might be informed on other images they've already seen. Some of them will be pretty creative, but generally they're going to draw something like two dishes on top of each other because it's kind of how it's portrayed in the description. From there, I'm going to ask them if they see any design flaws in this barge, in this barge that's drawn, any potential design flaws. At which point, I will point out verse 6 that this is a design that the Lord had given them, which has some significant flaws to it. And then we could point out what those three design flaws are. But I think the question that I might follow up then is, all right, then we had this debate before class started about God, whether he does or doesn't give us things that we can't overcome. Here he has deliberately designed a boat that does not work. And he wants, and we'll see this in chapter 6, he wants Jared and his people to get in this boat for 360 days with these design flaws, and they're going to get to this promise. Like there's all sorts of problems. So can you think of times in your life where, or in the examples of those around you, where you felt like, boy, God has just designed this poorly, whether it's the life that I'm in, a situation I'm going through, or maybe these are even unhealthy thought process we have about ourselves. But can you guys think about, why have you ever asked that question? Why did God design this, me, the situation? Why with all these obvious flaws to it? And then I just love taking them through one by one the different ways the Lord helps us to address those challenges. Sometimes he's going to give us direct instruction. I'm sitting here in front of the Birmingham, Alabama temple. Can we have a conversation? Ricky had mentioned that in chapter 3, we're going to get this beautiful temple imagery of the Lord peering through the veil to the brother of Jared and having a moment. Well, what kind of instruction do we receive when we go to the temple? What has President Nelson told us we can receive if we go to the temple, and kind of instruction? What about the times where he just says, just trust me, I'm going to cause the winds to blow, and it might feel super bumpy, but I am going to get you to the promised land. Have you had those moments? And then what about the moments where the Lord just says, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to exercise your own agency to find a solution, and then enlist my help to see that solution fulfilled? And oftentimes our best ideas are enhanced and even completely overcome when we have the Lord helping us. And then I would circle all back to it. Said, all right, how about we restate the statement? It's not, God never gives us anything we can't overcome. How about we reframe this? With God, we can overcome all things, and just kind of help get to that principle, and then just talk about maybe some ways that we can think differently when we approach our trials. I love the object lesson is built right into the text.
Yeah, so whether you teach it as 2 and then 3, or 2 and 3 and then maybe 2 and 3 again with a different emphasis, right? Because maybe that's a way to do it, is to do a second pass over the day. I can't think of anything that's any story that's more ready-made for like a punchy experience for the, like, there are some that are similarly, like Enos is a great little vignette about prayer and about coming into the presence of God. But here you have brother Jared. When I've taught it in the past, I've actually started in chapter 4, verses 6 and 7, because this is Moroni interpreting it for us. and looking straight at us. And in verse 7, he says, and in that day that they shall exercise faith in me, saith the Lord, even as the brother of Jared did, that they may become sanctified in me, then I will manifest unto them all the things which your brother Jared saw. Right. So we have this promise that we can see what the brother of Jared saw. So then I'd work backward to chapter 3. And then I'd say, look at verse 9. What kind of faith did he have? Well, he had more faith than anybody that had ever come before the Lord. And then I'd go back to chapter 2 and talk about verse 13. Well, right here, it doesn't seem like he has that much faith. Right here, it seems like he's forgotten to pray to the Lord for 4 years. So our question that we're trying to solve is, how does he get from chapter 13 to chapter 2, verse 13 to chapter 3, verse 9? Because if we can figure out how he does that, then we will get the blessing of chapter 4, verse 7. And that's how I would seed it. And then you go back into, well, what does he do from chapter 2 to chapter 3? How does he get there? He builds boats. But it's not the boats that are the important thing. It's the process of interacting with the Lord again and again, of receiving a commandment, of going and doing, of returning and reporting, counseling with the Lord, and that pattern of prayer. And this is what President Nelson says about that pattern. This is from his talk, Revelation for the Church, Revelation for Our Lives. He says, pray in the name of Jesus Christ about your concerns, your fears, your weaknesses, yes, the very longings of your heart. And then listen, write the thoughts that come to your mind, record your feelings, and follow through with actions that you are prompted to do or to take. As you repeat this process day after day, month after month, year after year, you will grow into the principle of revelation. That's the process that the brother Jared is doing. We have no idea how long it takes him to build these barges. Could have taken years to do, but it's a process of, here's the issue in my life. I'm going to work with the Lord, go and do return report. Work with the Lord, go and do and return report. So there's some incredible, really practical prayer instruction in this story. And the promise is we actually get brought to the presence of the Lord if we follow this pattern that President Nelson's inviting us to follow. Anything else on chapters 2 and 3 or those lessons as they're laid out?
Yes, I would say if there is a teacher out there that's wanting to have just a deeper study also, have you heard of Elder Holland's talk, Rending the Veil of Unbelief?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, that is a helpful one when you're studying these chapters, especially chapter 3. I'm just
looking at these 3 chapters, and the themes are so rich, and they really are kind of stretched across probably first 4 chapters, right? I like how Mason went all the way to 4 to be able to look back, that if we're going to have the faith like the brother of Jared, look at some of these principles, the principle of prayer, and the consistency and constancy that prayer was a part of his story of leading him to the promised land. That he was an agent to act and not simply be acted upon in the instruction that he was given. I love in chapter 3, it's actually in one of the supplemental ideas in the lesson, but if you look at when the Savior reveals himself to the brother of Jared after the whole finger situation, and then he shows himself to him from verse 14 to 20, you could spend time just looking about all the things you learn about Jesus Christ from what is described after he reveals himself to the brother of Jared. And that could be a really great conversation, because it is such a temple text here that when you go into the temple and you are taught and you're introduced into the presence of God, here are some of the same truths that you learn in the temple. Like, that's such a great truth here. It leads all the way through. And then I actually just went to the E14, and they have a section about the sealed portion of the Book of Mormon. I don't know if I even care to bring that up much more than to say, hey, there was a part here, according to chapter 5, verse 1.
Maybe just to inspire wonder, right?
Sure.
Or something like that, right? Curiosity, but yeah.
I mean, I would inspire that same wonder in the first 3 verses of chapter 1, where Moroni is like, hey, these 24 gold plates contained an entire record of Adam all the way down. And don't worry about it. If you guys get that later, it's going to be really great for you. I'm not even going to touch it. That inspires wonder in me. Like what else could there have been? But yeah.
So this last kind of 4 and 5 that they group together, it's a little bit of a weird grouping because in 4, this is Moroni kind of interjecting into the story, and in 4, he's really wrapping up the story that we get in 2 and 3, and then looking at us in the latter days and saying, therefore, this is what you need to take from it, right? And so there's the relevancy for us. And then in 5, it's really the start of a new section for him, where he just talks about kind of record keeping and things like that. What are you guys doing with this?
And it could be a good little just to pique interest and maybe bring in the church history side of this part, right? You get the 3 witnesses and the eventual reaching to it, right? I think that's a good place to bring it in.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a really good opportunity to maybe we start prepping a little church history and Doctrine and Covenants, and just talk about those 3 witnesses. I had a young man that's from another church come and ask me, and he said, your Book of Mormon doesn't really have witnesses that it's like this real thing, like we have with the Bible, where we can see these manuscripts that go back for years and years. And I said, well, actually, we do. We've got witnesses we've got up to 11 witnesses that have seen it. And I think it's really compelling to tell the story that Moroni foresaw the need to provide some of these physical witnesses for the Book of Mormon.
Nikki, anything?
Just if we were going to keep with the theme of prayer, overcoming your problems with Jesus Christ, and then having the faith to see that through. And then Ether 12:4, that verse 11, maybe that is the focus, is he believeth these things which I have spoken him, will I visit with the manifestations of my spirit, and he shall know and bear record of them. So we're talking about revelation, receiving revelation, and then bearing record. So there's always something we could do there. There is a quote from President Nelson at the end of that lesson 4 and 5 that's really good. Nothing opens the heavens quite like the combination of increased purity, exact obedience, earnest seeking, and daily feasting of the words of Christ in the Book of Mormon, and regular time committed to the temple and family history work. So that same thing you were saying, Mason, the idea of go, do, become. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I think you're going to have multiple opportunities throughout the Book of Ether to really bring Moroni's humanity into it. And some of the most powerful sections, like Ether 12, are really we're going to need to empathize with Moroni if we're going to get the power of what's being taught. But here's one place where you could do that, where Moroni is a person stuck in between 2 times, where he's received this record of a history from 2 people that are now dead, that were once the Lord's people, and now they're dead. And he's writing to a group of people who will be the Lord's people. And maybe he has a sense that he will have a direct hand in that. Maybe he doesn't, though. I don't get the sense that he does. But he's writing so earnestly to us. And what does he understand about the record that he's giving to us that maybe we don't get yet? And maybe we take the Book of Mormon for granted because it's so available, and because it's, we see cartoons about it, and there's movies about it. We're so familiar with these stories. Moroni doesn't experience it that way. This is the only thing that he can do for his father, who is now dead and who he loves dearly. And this is the only thing that he can do for us who haven't ever been born yet, right? But he knows that it's going to be so important. And so when he's writing these things, and if you think about all of the things from the 24 plates that he could include, he slows way down on the brother of Jared's interaction with the Lord. He will jump generations so quickly, and we're going to see that. This is essential for us, is what he's saying. You have to understand what the brother of Jared is doing here, because it has direct relevancy to you guys. And so anything that we can do to bring urgency to these lessons, I think is really important. And 4 and 5 does this thing where he turns to look at us and says, okay, you need to pay attention to what's going on here. And so maybe try and bring that in a little bit. Any final things, tips, tricks?
Just be aware, this is that time of year. We're in November. Once we get close to Thanksgiving, it's just gonna start picking up speed, which is unfortunate in where we're at, because we're gonna get to really quickly. There's we got 2 doctrinal masteries at the end of Ether, and then we've got 2 in Moroni, and we're going to start running out of time. And so now's not the time to just kind of bumble through a week. You may need to be looking ahead. If you've not done an assessment yet, you need to be picking the day and the time to do that. That's going to be most efficient for your class and for the timing, because once you start hitting the holidays, you're going to feel like you're running out of time always. And so just
you don't want to skip on Moroni 7, and you don't want to skip on Moroni 10 and some of these things, or Ether 12, right? These are some of just the golden parts of the Book of Mormon.
Right. Yeah. So just FYI, as you get close to the holidays, it's going to speed up. So just be aware.
Good. All right. Thank you, everybody. And this is just exciting stuff to teach. We really love teaching this stuff. And so I hope you have just an incredibly sacred experience with your students. Good luck, and reach out to us if you need anything.